evening, peoples. I'm Pastor Leia, and this is Ginger Snap, my co-host. So welcome back to our living room for our Bible study series. We've been going through the apostles. So we looked at the 12 main apostles and the 15 options of who those 12 men are. Then we looked at the bonus apostles, men and a woman who are referred to as apostles in Acts or later in the epistles. And so while we're kind of on that theme, I thought we would look at the three evangelists who are not among the apostles. So tonight we are looking at Mark, who is not an apostle, although it's easy to think that he was, or like assume that he was, because he wrote a whole gospel or whatever. Fun fact, the name Mark means consecrated to Mars, which is to say the Roman god of war, or in the Greek pantheon, Ares, which I guess makes perfect sense. I just hadn't really thought to make that connection until this afternoon, and it's kind of funny that Mark, who's the first Christian writer, basically would have a name that's marking him as belonging to a pagan god. Anyway, so the name Mark was kind of used in the Middle Ages, but not really, and it didn't really become popular in English until the 19th century, as opposed to Marcus, which was historically more popular, but is now not as popular. I feel like I've known one Marcus? No, at least two in my life, but more Marks than Marcuses. Anyway, so in art, he is often represented by a lion, especially a winged lion. And of course, because he is one of the four authors of the four Gospels, he would be shown also with a book or a scroll of some kind with the lion. So according to tradition, Mark is the cousin of the Apostle Barnabas. So he met Peter and followed Peter around and then wrote down some of his sermons, and that was kind of the basis for a lot of the gospel that he wrote. So 20 years after Jesus ascended and went back up into heaven, Mark went to Alexandria in Egypt, and he founded a church there, again according to legend. So he became the first bishop of Alexandria and is considered to be the founder of Christianity in Africa. So then, according to tradition, there are aspects of traditional Coptic liturgy that can be traced directly back to Mark, which would be awesome if that is the case. And even so, if they date that far back that it can't be attributed, that's kind of cool. Anyway, so he was martyred in the year 68. So also kind of a very technical point, the gospel is the gospel according to Mark and not the gospel of Mark, because it's the good news of Jesus as the way that Mark is telling it, not the good news of Mark personally. Kind of a pedantic point. So apparently Mark has been, so none of the gospels really say who the author is, or at least Mark certainly doesn't. But we've named it the Gospel according to Mark. And apparently that dates back to the 1st century. There was a Christian writer who not quite overlapped maybe by a few years with Mark, but was kind of the next generation. He is the first one who gave credit to Mark as having written this gospel, and we've kind of just rolled with it since that. That's almost a contemporary source at that point, so does it really matter? No, not really. I just think it's interesting. There's a couple ideas about Mark, since he's not one of the apostles. There's an idea that maybe he was unique in having never met Jesus personally before he went up into heaven. That would definitely make this a unique perspective. Because of course it doesn't say, I saw these things, it just says these things happened. But alternatively, Mark has been considered to be a few different kind of side background characters and little scenes of the Gospels, which I think is fascinating that somebody decided that, for example, he must be one of the servants at the wedding at Cana. There is literally no reason to think that. I think it's kind of a cool idea that, he saw this miracle like one time and then ended up writing a gospel, but there's really no reason to think that he was like there. So then there are two other little bits that Mark may or may not be in, depending on who you ask. And I just think they're neat little scenes, so I wanted to share them. So help if my notes were in the right place. Does my mouse need a new battery? I think my mouse might need a new battery. So in Mark 14, 12, okay. So on the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb is sacrificed, Jesus' his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and make the preparations for you to eat the Passover?" So Jesus sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him, and wherever he enters, say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." So the disciples set out and went to the city and found everything as Jesus had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. So some people think that the author of the Gospel according to Mark might be the man who was carrying the water, who then led them to the room where they ended up having the Last Supper. Again, there's really no reason to think that, but it's interesting that he's... Anyway, so the other little scene that... Oh, come on, mouse, just scroll a little bit. Nice, mouse. The other scene that I had heard before, that some people think that this is Mark, is a very odd scene. And of course, with that caveat, last year we went through some of the weird Gospels, the non-canonical books in which Jesus is like murdering his friends as a kid and then bringing them back, and like pigeons, and then all sorts of weird things, and the holy diapers and all interesting things. But even like compared to that, this is an odd scene, and I don't know why it's like never the central verses of a Good Friday service. Anyway, so also from Mark 14, 48 to 52. So Jesus has just been arrested. Then Jesus said to them, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as if I were a bandit? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled." All of them deserted him and fled. A certain young man was following Jesus, wearing nothing but a linen cloth. They caught hold of him, but he left the linen cloth and ran off naked. This is the word of the Lord. It's an odd scene. Yeah, so some people think that maybe the author of Mark is that man who ran off naked. So anyway, Mark is apparently the saint invoked against insect bites, which is a very useful thing. It hadn't occurred to me that there was a saint that you called upon to protect you from insect bites, but I endorse that. Insects are kind of the worst. He is also the patron saint of attorneys, captives, shoemakers, lions, notaries, and stained glass workers, which is a very interesting assortment of completely unrelated professions, and also lions. So, Ginger Snap, you're kind of like a very tiny lion. Are you? No, you don't care? No, well, cats are pagan anyway. They remember when we worshiped them as gods in Egypt. They have not forgotten. Yeah, and also stained glass workers. Yay, I guess that includes me. So his feast day is April 25th. And there's a few unique ways that it's celebrated around the world. So in Venice, the day is celebrated as the Rosebud Festival, when men traditionally give a single rosebud to the women they love. According to legend, Mark's relics were brought to Venice from Alexandria in the 9th century, so he's kind of a big deal in Venice. In Lithuania, it's a day of rest for the earth, so like there's no digging or plowing. I really like that idea, a day of rest for the earth. And in Renaissance England, it was a thing to keep a silent vigil in the church porch from 11 p.m. on the eve of St. Mark's Day until 1 a.m. that morning. And I think there was like some fasting going on in there too, which is very interesting. Those are 3 extremely different ways of marking this occasion, which is what I think is particularly interesting. So since we are looking at the author of the Gospel according to Mark, Matthew is a different person, a few things that are kind of unique about this Gospel as opposed to the other 3. It is the shortest. It does not have anything that could at all be interpreted as a Christmas narrative. So when we first meet Jesus in the Gospel according to Mark, he's already an adult. So there's no birth story. There's also no listing of ancestry, that his father's father and his father's father's father, and it's no one. That's not in Mark. He also does not appear like on screen after the resurrection in the original ending. He's kind of off screen. But we don't see him, so the story just ends with the women being told he's not here, he's risen. And they're like, honestly, we're not entirely sure what to do with this information. And then the book ends in the original ending. So there is a longer ending that was added on to Mark. I forget when, I should have looked that up. I definitely one Easter preached on the shorter ending of Mark about how it kind of feels deeply unsatisfying in some ways, but the point of the story is not necessarily what all of the apostles and followers did. The point is that he is risen, and because it's such a cliffhanger, it's like we are the rest of the story. Anyway, that was my Easter sermon in last year? Yeah, 2021. Anyway. So Mark is also the only gospel that names Jesus as Son of Mary, specifically. Also in Mark, Jesus calls himself a carpenter, as opposed to like Matthew, where he's called a carpenter's son, which is an interesting distinction there. Of course, he definitely would have known how to do carpentry, even if he hadn't been formally trained. He would have been around a lot of it all through his growing up years. So the gospel that Mark was probably written around like the year 70-ish, give or take a few years. So that would definitely make it the oldest gospel by far. And scholars kind of look at Mark and then look at Matthew and Luke. They're like, kind of feels like some of the like wording or like way stories are framed. These authors may have had Mark as something like some kind of reference point. So Mark was definitely written first. So apparently, and I didn't ever think to count this up, but apparently 1/3 of the book consists of healings and miracles. I think that's really interesting. Like a full third of the book is healings and miracles as opposed to like conversations or, like there's a really, really long Good Friday in the Gospel of John, for example. But here, the author of Mark is really putting a big emphasis on healings and miracles because that's what he writes about the most, which, anyway. So that is Mark, who may or may not be the author of the Gospel according to Mark, because it was a long time ago. Anyway, so I do think it's really interesting, the side characters that some people like to think that Mark was. The idea of him being a cousin of one of the apostles kind of adds to his like credibility as being an author of the gospel, that's like an extra layer of connection. Not just that he followed Peter and wrote down some of his sermons, but that he was closely related to one of Jesus's top 12. So technically we don't know who wrote the Gospels, but at some point in the first century, we decided that Mark wrote this one. So there you have it. There's Mark. So next week we'll look at Luke and then Paul. So before we say goodnight, I would like to remind you and shamelessly plug, because I'm excited about this, so I hope that you join me. We will be having our first church game night tomorrow, Wednesday the 7th of September at 7 p.m. So I've got a whole bunch of games in my office, more for like ages 15 and up. Games that are pretty easy to learn, like not the super complicated ones that take like 18 hours to learn, and then even so you're like, why is this fun? I still don't understand all the rules. Maybe that's just me projecting. Anyway, so it should be fun. We'll play some games, have some snacks. There will be snacks. I kind of thought that I might make some cookies, so you might comment below with your favorite kind of cookie. I haven't decided what to make yet. Yeah, so join me for game night tomorrow. And also, I would love to see some more of you at our in-person Bible study on Thursday mornings at 9. We are reading C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, which is kind of an overview of very like general look at Christianity, and a lot of like philosophical ideas and ethics, and a lot of good like food for thought and like prompts for discussion in there. Also, C.S. Lewis is just a cool guy. Also, like, the fact that he was an atheist, and then through his friendship with J.R.R. Tolkien, like the guy who wrote Lord of the Rings, he was brought to faith from that. And I forget if it's in Mere Christianity or something else that he wrote, but he said that when he was an atheist, he had to believe that most of all humans had been pretty much entirely wrong about any religious belief throughout all of history. But once he became a Christian, he could believe that most humans were at least partially right. I like that idea. Anyway, so yeah, would also love to see you on Thursday mornings at 9 for that in-person Bible study. I've got more copies of Mere Christianity in the office if you would like one. So, oh, I almost hate to have her wave goodnight. She's enjoying this chin scritch so much. Well, good night from me, and I hope to see you later this week.